XDefiant experienced significant issues upon its launch in May of 2024. While some of the more technical issues were addressed, the declining player count and persistent questioning of the developer's actions were not. After several months, Mark Rubin, the executive producer of XDefiant, announced that the game would enter a sunsetting period of 6 months before being taken offline for good. That period ended on June 4th, 2025. And while it was a sad day for some, others viewed the memory of the game a bit differently. We recently chatted with an ex-Ubisoft QA tester, who in this video will be referred to as Flip, to get some behind-the-scene information about what the development of XDefiant was really like. And as you'll soon find out, there will be some taboo topics, a hated game mode, and our source does tell us directly, quote, a bunch of idiots making conflicting decisions. The lack of fantasy and focus on a hated game mode. Gritty maps were a staple of XDefiant that marked it as being similar to games like Call of Duty. Instead of focusing on the more fantastical properties that Ubisoft has, almost every map was styled after more gritty Ubisoft titles. For instance, Echelon HQ was styled after Splinter Cell, Attica Heights was Ghost Recon Phantoms, and Liberty was The Division 2. It wasn't until XDefiant was hitting its last hurrah that Flip says we, quote, got the most of the maps they knew of. But the maps that were pushed out for the final content dump had much more polish that could have gone into them. While the previously mentioned maps are what players remember XDefiant for, locations such as Enchanted Forest and the Skells didn't get widely seen and recognized until the very end. Flip also says there's a chance that development for the game could have changed drastically. Quote, had Enchanted Forest been experienced by the live player base and the reception that was seen, there was a solid chance even more fantastical maps could have made their way into the game, beyond Forest and Razia's realm. Apparently the team was upset that more maps like these didn't surface, with Flip voicing that, quote, all the gritty maps were so boring. One of the staples of any first-person shooter title is the game modes. Most shooter titles such as Call of Duty or even Battlefield put players up against each other in a team deathmatch mode, or search and destroy. And at launch, XDefiant only had free-for-all for its standard game mode. Instead of team deathmatch, XDefiant focused on a game mode called Hotshot, and it turns out this really wasn't a very popular mode amongst the development team. Quote, internally, we hated Hotshot. Quote, we would have internal playtests for a few hours to test maps, fixes, classes, guns, etc. across departments. And we'd queue with all the game modes checked so RNG would randomly put us into one of the 5 game modes. I definitely know a number of the departments wouldn't check Hotshot. That game mode was terrible and only one person enjoyed it. Hotshot was forced onto people who didn't want to play a shooter ramped up to 11. Our source told us that many of the team members weren't amazing at shooters, so Hotshot felt overwhelming, especially since it required players to kill and collect all while the Flash is racing around gobbling up coins. Another tale of toxic development led by boys. In development, XDefiant was run by a small group of higher-ups that was internally labeled by our source as the Boys Club. This club, quote, was a group of Ubisoft old-timers, with toxic leadership traits you'd expect from a corporate job. Our source tells us that the mentality of the Boys Club was, quote, you've never shipped a game before, what do you know? Flip also tells us the Boys Club didn't get along. They told us that members of the club didn't really like each other. Quote, it was like a floor that was created specifically for 5 people to be assholes. And they took this as an opportunity to use employees. The members of this club would also be giving conflicting messaging to developers. Quote, it made working there so chaotic. Our source tells us that the designers, quote, always had to have multiple different versions of abilities or visuals, just in case the person who made the request wasn't at the meeting. But one of the other boys was there who wanted to pull things in a different direction. He continued, the team also felt like they were, quote, making a game for someone who only knew how to ask, how does it work in Call of Duty, instead of making a game for a community that finds the genre stale. One of the more specific references our source told us is that the map Daytona, based on The Crew 2, was almost delayed or scrapped because a member of the Boys Club hated the red car that was in the map. Quote, an entire map retheme was cut because a member of the club didn't like it, and it contained feedback from others erasing 6 months of work. In another example, Flip told us that comparing the game to a hero shooter like Overwatch was a bit taboo. Flip mentioned a higher-up named Scott, quote, asked for a visual indication someone was affected by CC. aka crowd control, primarily those affected by the assassin's cherry bomb. This visual indicator was meant to be a small hand gesture, and something above the head like stars. In a later meeting, quote, Scott apparently forgot the whole friggin' thing, and after being shown the thing he requested, he had a brief pause and said, quote, why did you even do this? What was the purpose of this waste of time? And it was from this incident, one of those working on the faction ended up quitting. Multiple faction abilities were compared to Overwatch hero abilities, with the stun being similar to Cassidy's flashbang, Phantom's barrier being similar to Orisa's, and DeadSec's hijack ability being compared to Sombra's. Quote, it became a running joke across multiple departments I worked with that our inspiration art was Overwatch, because we knew something already existed for it, but if it wasn't in Call of Duty, you were having daggers stared at you because there's only one other shooter it could be from, and you don't mention it. The fight for balance abandoned, and a bloody, overpowered faction. The factions within this game were in a constant state of needing to be reworked, especially as newer factions were released. Flip recalled the changes the factions needed to undergo to make them more viable options. Quote, the boys hated the bio boost nerf. Statistics showed that 80% of the top-end gunfighters were decided by who had more Libertad, so it had to be treated. Not only this, but some other major changes were required for the Highwaymen faction, specifically with the M79 grenade launcher. Quote, M79 had 3 ammunition that carried over through death. It was actually so strong, the team joked that there didn't need to be another ability, or even an ultra at that point. A lot changed when the Wolves faction was being worked on, as it marked a, quote, tonal shift for the game. After this, it became a, quote, nightmare for balance. Our source told us that the team, quote, would have to do what the League did and rework their original launch factions, because the new blood was going to outshine the old guard. The power shift could be seen after the game started its sunset period. The assassins were introduced with a one-hit kill melee ability, along with the wall hack. Flip told us, quote, the balance discussions were always pushed back, even as factions were changed around. Thinking back on it, quote, this decision was most likely an attempt to give people the next shiny flashy thing, hoping to promote player retention at the cost of ruining aspects of the game later. There were additional factions planned if the game hadn't been cancelled, but even those were unbalanced. Quote, one of the factions planned after Blood Dragon was tumultuous and forgotten. One of the traits of the said faction, quote, was deserted because it became too complex, and ultimately, quote, took away from the gunplay. The faction modeled after Blood Dragon was so overpowered that the team, quote, couldn't come up with a way to nerf it, and couldn't come up with a way to offer a second ability that balanced it out. Flip mentioned the initial patch was an ability that denied players access to a location. Quote, one of the boys didn't want any abilities that could block off entire swaths of the game at a whim. Of course, the team pointed out that the drone swarm ability did this. This was met with a, quote, hand waved and the subject changed. One of the designers stated, quote, it feels like we're just making up the rules on the move, and I'm starting to wonder if this meeting was worth our time. An executive producer who didn't deserve all the hate he got. Mark Rubin was often attacked for his role in XDefiant. He dealt with the public, which, as we all know, tends to end badly, especially when gamers think they know more about the games than those who are making them. Flip mentioned how Rubin often dealt with players saying that they wanted to play the game, even in an unfinished state. They told us Rubin's responses before launch were often truthful about the state of the game, and how it wasn't in a good enough state for players to get into. Quote, all the shit talk Rubin got about netcode and tech issues, I don't think was warranted. Many of the technical issues we were running into were more a fault on the engine's choice than anything else. Flip told us the team had strong ambitions, but it was cut down by crappy moving parts, making development slower and less accurate than it should have been. He continued, if it weren't for a bunch of idiots making conflicting decisions, XDefiant would have launched more complete like everyone had wanted. Flip remarked on how the public always felt that Rubin was disingenuous. While they weren't completely wrong, Rubin wasn't always deserving of the attacks he got from fans of the game. During one of the all-hands meetings, our source stated that, quote, Rubin was the embodiment of the nothing to see here scene from Naked Gun. While it was obvious to employees that things were spiraling, and he was clearly lying to Ubisoft's employees. He lied to the people making the game, but I don't think he was as dishonest to the public as people say he was. Now, despite all the issues, there were plenty of those who enjoyed the game. But at the end of the day, it looks like XDefiant didn't turn out to be the Call of Duty killer that Ubisoft advised it to be. Well, that about does it here for this tell-all interview about XDefiant. If you want more gaming content just like this, keep it locked to Game Sandwich for all your gaming news, rumors, and reviews. And we'll see you guys next time.